when times are tough, they can either bring out the very best or the worst in people. There's an old Hasidic tale. A few days before Passover, a desperate man went to visit the local rabbi. Rabbi, he pleaded, please help me. I have no money to buy milk for my family. Wait here, the rabbi said. I'll see if I can find a little something to give you. A moment later, the rabbi returned with a fistful of gold coins. The poor man was shocked at the amount, but of course took it and thanked the rabbi greatly. The rabbi's wife saw the exchange and questioned her husband. She said, well, why did you give him so much? Don't we need money as well? And the rabbi responded to her, Passover is just a few days away. If this man can't afford milk, surely he needs more to buy wine and food for his Seder table. Now that's one end of the spectrum. Why did I read this story? Because this week in the news I saw an absolute shanda. A shanda is Yiddish for a shame. Worse than a shame. The Hebrew catches it better. Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's holy name. Just this week, a Hasidic community in New York, it was discovered that a group of these so-called pious Jews, observant, pious Jews, had hoarded N95 masks and were selling them at exorbitant, inflated prices. And we watched this video footage as the FBI carried case after case after case of these brand new N95 masks that literally filled a box truck. Hospitals, where doctors, nurses, medical professionals, volunteers, people putting their lives on the line, desperate to get these masks, and these chazas, these pigs were trying to profiteer off of them. My friends, this is idol worship. Literally idol worship. How so? The Hebrew word for mask, does anybody know what the Hebrew word for mask is? It's masecha. Masecha. Does anybody recognize that word from the Torah, masecha? The Hebrew word for mask is a masecha. In modern Hebrew, we say a masecha is a mask, either for Purim or a mask for gas or protection. But also, masecha means molten or molded or cast, as in an egel masecha, a golden calf. The word in the Torah for the golden calf, the idol that the Israelites built when Moses was on the mountain just a little bit too long than they thought was convenient, they built an egel masecha, a mask, a molten, a fake God, yes. Now, why did seeing this week upset me so deeply? And it has. I saw it 2-3 days ago, and I cannot get the image out of my mind of these black-coated, bearded, hatted people standing there.
And they're
as their
students and women.
And as these masks were being taken away from them. Why has this offended the very core of my decency? Because in just a few days, we're going to be setting our tables for Pesach in whatever ways that we're able. And as we reach the part of the Seder when we begin the Magid, the retelling of the story, we're going to take the middle piece of matzah and we're going to break it in two. And we're going to raise it high above in the air. And we're going to say in Aramaic, halachma anya. This is the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, the bread of oppression. All of those apply that our forebears ate in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, let them come and eat. Whoever is in need, let them come and join our Passover Seder. Now, every year when we read that, I wonder to myself, what if at that very moment, What if at that split second that we raised that matzah high and said, this is the bread of poverty, let all come and eat, what if there was a knock at the door? And standing there was a person who was truly, truly hungry. Maybe a homeless person. And I mean dirty clothes, crusty, stinky, the whole picture. Would we share our food? And now in our current situation, with all of us huddled in private, afraid to mix with our friends and families, let alone perfect strangers, this question becomes even more challenging. I don't know. We can help in ways, but I submit to you from the very beginning of our story as free people, a time when we had nothing but a meager, thin, flat piece of bread. What are we told to do with it? What are we commanded to do with it? To share it. To share what we have. As we retell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, our exodus from Egypt, we're reminded of this core principle. Built into the very foundation of our faith and ethics is that regardless of how little we have, we should remember that once we suffered in slavery. We've known hardship, we've known oppression, and having experienced this makes us incumbent upon us. It's required. It's not a choice that we have to be sure to treat other people to make sure they never feel the same way, and also actively seek to lift up anyone who's suffering, who's hungry, who's oppressed, or who's hurting. The Torah has many, many commandments, 613. But one commandment is repeated more than any other one. A whopping 36 times the Torah commands us, in one form or another, be kind to the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. 36 times. Here's a couple of versions of it. When you see the animal of your enemy lying under its burden, and you would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it up with him. You shall not subvert the rights of the needy in their disputes. You shall not oppress the stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. And I'm going to give you one more. When you reap the harvest of your field and overlook a sheaf, do not turn back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. In order that Adonai your God may bless you in all of your undertakings, when you beat down the fruit of your olive trees, do not go over them again. This shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not pick over them again. That too shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Always remember you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Now, this stranger, orphan, widow, my friends, that is not an exhaustive list. That is a paradigm. It's a paradigm for all who are in need, for the voiceless, for the marginalized, for the minority, for the suffering. And today, thankfully, most of us are not slaves, and most of us are not poor or hungry. Now, I've said the words, man, I'm hungry, a million times. But thank God I've never known what it really means to be hungry. And I hope none of you have either. To not be sure where my next meal may be coming from. And yet we're all now facing some pretty serious uncertainty about our own futures. How long will we be hunkered down? Will we be able to get the basic things that we need to survive? Yes, we're asking these questions now. In this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav, we're told that every day in the temple, the Kohen, the high priest, was to wake up early and prepare the temple for the day's offerings. And this Kohen, with all his privilege, with all his finery, with all his clout, the first thing he did was dress in a very simple linen shroud, his garments, and he would go and clean the ashes out from the previous day's offerings on the altar. Not the servants, not some underlings, the priest himself. The 19th century Hasidic master Simcha Bunim tells us that this was to prevent him from forgetting his connection to ordinary people and their ordinary concerns. In other words, keep it real, Mr. Kohen. You're no better than anyone else, because in the end, ultimately, we're all just ash. Now, in a few days, on Pesach evening, Wednesday night, when we say those words I mentioned earlier, halachma anya, this is the bread of affliction, this is the bread of poverty, let it remind you that our willingness to share has tremendous power. What does the willingness to share have? It has the power to transform even that humble matzah into something else entirely. Throughout our history, even if all we had was that lowly, dry, tasteless bit of flat bread, if we were willing to share it, then it becomes the bread of kindness, the bread of freedom, the bread of acceptance, and dare I say, the bread of hope. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach v'Kasher.